think one of the things that America has to face is the reality that it is an empire.
No, you must use it. You must use it because it make you rebel. Against what?
They were in front of Radio 8, shooting at the station.
No es un crimen defender nuestros propios derechos como pueblos indígenas.
Greetings and blessings. Welcome to part one of the quarantine series from Travelogue Media. I'm Jason Clarell in Quetzaltenango, Guatemala. Thanks for tuning in. In this edition, I'll talk about some coronavirus figures, the U.S. response to the crisis, the response to the response to the crisis, advice from Chris Hedges, and an homage to Durham circa 2000. Stick around. All right, so let's get the latest, or let's get the coronavirus figures out of the way before we get to some other matters. Right. So, World Health Organization publishes situation reports every 24 hours. So that's where I'm getting the info, and I'll post a link to that page if you want to stay up to date. And as of recording on 28 March, we have 509,164 confirmed cases globally, of which 46,484 are new cases within the last 24 hours. And so far, over 23,000 people have died from the virus. So, no joke. Here in Guatemala, there are 24 total confirmed cases, none in the last 24 hours, and one reported death. There's currently a curfew, toque de queda, in effect from 4 p.m. to 4 p.m. to 4 a.m. So just a few numbers for you. I hope wherever you are listening from, you're safe and healthy and not running out of food or anything like that. So again, I'll link to the WHO reports so you can find the latest numbers. All right, so let's talk about the response to this pandemic from the United States. I guess you could sum it up as never waste a good crisis. And the U.S. has certainly not let this crisis go to waste. So far, we've seen a massive bailout for banks and corporations. No big surprise there. With, I would say, grotesquely inadequate protections for poor and working people. Then, of course, we have the attacks leveled at places like Cuba and Venezuela. While it might not be a surprise for some of you, it's absolutely shameful given what the world is facing right now. I just want to share a couple of things from the Alliance for Global Justice newsletter. They're great. I'll link to them. So in their newsletter, they have a news and review sort of thing. So the first one I want to share is from People's Dispatch, an article from Vijay Prashad et al. Called "As the World Tackles COVID-19 Pandemic, the U.S. Raises the Pressure on Venezuela." It reads, "In the March 26 press conference, it was almost comical how little evidence the U.S. provided when it accused Venezuela's President Maduro and several of the leaders of his government of narco-trafficking. The U.S. offered $15 million for the arrest of Maduro and $10 million for the others. Maduro, U.S. Attorney Jeffrey Berman said dramatically, quote, very deliberately deployed cocaine as a weapon, unquote. Evidence for this? Not presented at all. It is surreal that the U.S., during the COVID-19 global pandemic, chooses to put its efforts into this ridiculous, evidence-free indictment against Maduro and other members of the government. A few hours before the announcement, word spread that the U.S. was going to place Venezuela's government on the state sponsor of terrorism list, the highest condemnation of a government. But they had to pause, and the pause itself came for absurd reasons. If the U.S. accused Maduro's government of being a state sponsor of terrorism, then it would be acknowledging that the Maduro government was indeed the government of Venezuela. Hilarious. I mean, a bounty on Maduro. I guess when the coup and assassination attempts fail, what else can you do? Give him points for creativity. And what the U.S. really hates is Venezuela aiding Cuba and getting doctors around the world to affected countries. Just wow. I really want to find the article on Bolsonaro walking back his posture on Cuban doctors in Brazil. If I can find that article, I'll definitely link to it as well. But Bolsonaro is a real piece of work. But okay, just to get back to Venezuela for a minute, if you're sort of on the fence about Venezuela, you really need to check out Abby Martin's YouTube playlist. She does a really good job of cutting through a lot of the propaganda. So if you're a little fuzzy on Venezuela, please go check that out. I'll post a link. Okay, right. So Cuba, doing what they do, sending doctors, apparently this is a bad thing, right? Because they obviously don't want to prevent people from getting sick, right? I mean, clearly they must have other nefarious motives. So the U.S. is pressuring countries to reject Cuban aid amid a global pandemic. Here's what Prensa Latina published. In the midst of the pandemic, the U.S. today is devoting efforts and resources to denigrating Cuban medical cooperation and threatening those countries that receive aid from the island's health brigades. Cuban Foreign Minister Bruno Rodriguez stressed that despite the difficult situation, Cuba is modestly offering to provide some cooperation to those who need it. Quote, "We have been dealing with the requests for medical assistance from several countries, which are asking for Cuban health personnel to deal with the crisis generated by COVID-19, unquote. Through its social networks, the U.S. Embassy in Cuba is disseminating messages that attack the island's medical cooperation. Unbelievable. All right. Now the bailout, stimulus, whatever. Here's our gal AOC putting the smack down on this bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to our Majority Leader. I represent one of the hardest hit communities in the hardest hit city in this country, Queens, New York. 13 dead in a night in Elmhurst Hospital alone. Our community's reality is this country's future if we don't do anything. Hospital workers do not have protective equipment. We don't have the necessary ventilators, but we have to go into this vote eyes wide open. What did the Senate majority fight for? One of the largest corporate bailouts with as few strings as possible in American history. Shameful. The greed of that fight is wrong for crumbs for our families. And the option that we have is to either let them suffer with nothing or to allow this greed and billions of dollars, which will be leveraged into trillions of dollars, to contribute to the largest income inequality gap in our future. There should be shame about what was fought for in this bill and the choices that we have to make.
Gentlelady's time's expired.
And I yield.
Yeah, so speak it. We don't know who's listening, but you got to speak it. Yeah. There's also a piece by the executive editor of the American Prospect, David Dayen, called Unsanitized, the Essential Imbalance of the 2020 Bailout. And so he really lays out everything that's wrong with a piece of legislation that pretty much had everyone hostage unless it was passed. So So I know everyone's a critic, but just remember that there's a lot about this bill that was just straight up misrepresented or misreported in corporate media. So go read this piece. I'll link to it. And why don't we listen to a bit of this interview on the Hill?
So we have this bill that earmarks $425 billion for loans to corporate America. But what has been said explicitly is that that money would go to the Federal Reserve to capitalize a lending facility for corporate actors that would be 10 times the size. It would be leveraged at 10 to 1. And the losses, if there are any, would come out of that $425 billion tranche. So that is far higher than what's been reported. And if you look at the imbalance here, workers get a necessary but temporary boost on unemployment insurance, these direct payments, things like that. And it's dwarfed by the size of what this money cannon that's being pointed at corporate America to prop up stock prices and executive compensation.
Yeah, wow. Yeah. Okay, so I just want to share one more article, and actually a podcast as well. I know. But seriously, there's tons of great stuff out there. People be talking about stuff. I'll add this to the links. And there are going to be a lot of links in this episode. Sorry, not sorry. All right, so this is a bit out of the scope of this podcast. I mainly want to focus on Caribbean, Latin America, but I thought it was really interesting. And if you're into geopolitical analysis, I think you will too. Anyway, it's called China Locked in Hybrid War with U.S. And it's by Pepe Escobar. He was just featured on the Moderate Rebels podcast. Here's just a teensy-weensy bit.
Sticking to facts, what the Trump administration has been hurling at the Chinese, especially since the beginning of the Trump trade war, has accomplished something that I thought it would not happen for at least for the next 10 or 15 years. Chinese diplomacy used to be passive and reactive. Now is active. And now they are not mincing their words anymore. And we had the best example a few days ago with that famous tweet that reverberated around the world by a Chinese diplomat, basically asking the Americans to come clean about the origins of coronavirus.
Interesting stuff for sure. Wuhan virus, Chinese virus. And of course, you remember in the candidates debates, it was like, how should China be punished, right? Yeah. Anyway, go listen to that episode. Check the link in the show notes. All right, good people. Let's go to a music break and continue with a response from Chris Hedges. Back in a few. was a track called Matador by this really great band called Topography, one of the many, many great bands to emerge from the early 2000s Durham scene. We'll get to that. We'll get to more of that in a bit. So as a consequence of the social distancing, quarantines in effect, I've been attending a lot more webinars, and there were a couple of really good ones from Extinction Rebellion, #AloneTogether. Yeah, they've put together a really good program of events on Zoom, which I guess is the real jammy jam now. Anyway, I would recommend checking out the interviews with Micah White, co-founder of Occupy, and Chris Hedges. Those are up on YouTube. Check the links. And I actually want to play a clip from the Chris Hedges interview, his response to my question in the Q&A.
So next we have one from Jason. He says he's a podcaster in Guatemala. He was asking, how can independent media in Latin America or anywhere be most effective during this crisis?
Well, I would say that most of the examples of effective nonviolent civil disobedience come from the global South, not from the industrialized North. So I would say that he probably has a lot more to teach me than I have to teach him.
Okay, so I was actually hoping for a little bit more, considering he spent so much time in Latin America. If you're not sure who Chris Hedges is, he was a New York Times reporter for a long time, wrote several books, including one called War is a Force That Gives Us Meaning. He's kind of known for this quote, I don't fight fascists because I think I'll win. I fight fascists because they're fascists, or something along those lines. Anyway, just Google him if you don't know. So if you're getting a bit stir crazy and you want to stay connected, I highly recommend the #AloneTogether TV program from Extinction Rebellion. Yeah, just tons of workshops, interviews, webinars, yoga classes. Yeah, go check out the link in the show notes. Lots of good stuff. So, yeah, get your jammies on. The revolution's here. #General Strike 2020. So I'd like to dedicate this episode to the Durham crew. We just did a Zoom call. Thanks again, Roberto, for putting it all together. Durham, North Carolina, early 2000s. You know, things have gotten really bad when you look back fondly on the Bush years. But what really made that time so special was the real sense of community. Everybody just hanging out on the front porch, playing foosball or game of chess, listening to music, drinking, relaxing, having a good time. Everyone just was, really right on. Everyone was in at least one band. Lots of creative people, lots of creative energy all around. Buenas vibras. A place and time unlike any other. I always remember it fondly. So Durham crew, this one's for you. Okay, wonderful people. That's going to do it for part 1 of the quarantine series from Travelogue Media. Music for this episode from the Durham Rocks compilation. We heard from Topography, Blackstrap, and Dom Casual. Make sure to check the show notes for all the links. If you don't see them, just go to the original post on travelogue.media. Please follow, like, share, subscribe. And if you really, really love me, a donation would be swell. I appreciate you stopping by. Until next time, que todo sea amor, walk tall, live free.